In the book Beloved, Toni Morrison highlights the negative aspects of slavery. Morrison's repeated use of the motif manhood enhances her argument. Morrison not only states that slavery is bad, but uses manhood to show the audience that all types of slavery are equally oppressing, the after effects of slavery, and the dehumanization of the slaves.
Was that it? Is that where the manhood lay? In the naming done by a white man who was supposed to know? Who gave them the privilege not of working but deciding how to? No. He thought what they said had merit. What they felt was serious. Deferring to his slave's opinions did not deprive him of authority or power. It was schoolteacher who taught them otherwise. A truth that waved like a scarecrow in the rye. They were only sweet home men at Sweet Home. One step off that ground, and they were trespassers among the human race. Watchdogs without teeth, steer bulls without horns, gelded workhorses whose neigh and whinny could not be translated into a language responsible humans spoke. His strength had lain in knowing schoolteacher was wrong. Now he wondered. If schoolteacher was right, it explained how he had come to be a rag doll, picked up and put back down anywhere, anytime, by a girl young enough to be his daughter. Paul D's pondering of his own manhood now and in the past leads him to the realization that all slavery is bad slavery. He realizes now, after analyzing the past, that even though Garner gave them the illusion of freedom, they were still just as oppressed and controlled as when schoolteacher was their master. After all, Garner was not giving them the option of working, but choosing how to. Although Paul D denies this reality at first, he comes to understand it is true because of the effects of his stolen freedoms on his life now. Since he was not given the ability to be an independent man when he was a slave, he cannot control himself in the present. This is evident as he is now unable to refuse to have sex with Beloved and is actually unable to stay settled in one place. He does not feel like he is man enough to provide, sleep with his partner, or even stay settled down somewhere. A teenage girl moved him around at will like he was a rag doll. Morrison's use of manhood, in this instance, shows that all slavery is equally as oppressing, that having freedoms taken away in the past severely damages men's futures, and that slavery is terribly dehumanizing. While she does not say these things outright in her work, her use of the motif manhood enhances her argument against slavery by showing these truths to the reader.
Sixo always knew that he and the other slaves were not considered men when they were slaves. Sixo planned to escape Sweet Home to rid his life of his master's oppression. Sixo's planning to escape is evidence of his knowledge that he was not a man when he was in slavery. His realization that he was not a man when he was a slave led him to choose death over a life of slavery. If Sixo had thought he had rights as a slave, he would not have had this much of a problem with being a slave. Sixo's choice to fight for freedom and die is evidence of the effects of him knowing he was never truly an independent man. Sixo knew the slaves were not men and realized death was better than having his rights withheld from him.
Mister, he looked so free, better than me, stronger, tougher. Son of bitch couldn't even get out of the shell himself, but he was still king, and I was. Paul D stopped himself and squeezed his left hand with his right. He held it that way long enough for it and the world to quiet down and let him go on. Mister was allowed to be and stay what he was, but I wasn't allowed to be and stay what I was. Even if you cooked him, you'd be cooking a rooster named Mister. But wasn't no way I'd ever be Paul D again, living or dead. Schoolteacher changed me. I was something else, and that something was less than a chicken sitting in the sun on a tub. Toni Morrison, page 86. While a slave under schoolteacher, Paul D and the other slaves were chained and abused as though they were less than humans. In many instances, they were treated as less than animals even. Mister was the name of the rooster which schoolteacher had housed on his property. It was allowed to roam freely, without constraint or abuse. As Paul D was degraded as a human, the rooster maintained its status as a free being, and in many ways Mister was treated better than Paul D. In this scene, Paul D has a bit in his mouth as he is chained along with the other slaves. This bit, which was typically used to stifle the cries and bite of a horse, was now being used as a means of human degradation by a schoolteacher. Paul D was acutely aware of this less-than-human treatment, as he regarded his treatment as not even fit for an animal, and at times even envied Mr. the Rooster and the way he was treated by a schoolteacher.
Now it faced greater ruin than what Garner left for it, because of the loss of 2 niggers at the least, and maybe 3, because he is not sure they will find the one called Hal. The sister-in-law is too weak to help out, and doggone if now there ain't a full-scale stampede on his hands. He would have to trade this here one for $900 if he could get it, and set out to secure the breeding one, her foal, and the other one, if he found him. Paul D. finding out his worth strengthens Morrison's argument because the fact that slaves had a price to be bought and sold immensely dehumanized them. When Paul D. finds out his worth, it puts his manhood in jeopardy because he now compares himself to the price of other slaves and is prompted to prove himself to show that he is worth more than the price that was given to him. Throughout the book, Paul D. always questions his manhood and looks to prove himself due to the fact that there was a price tag put on him.
He believed he was having house fits, the glassy anger men sometimes feel when a woman's house begins to bind them, when they want to yell and break something or at least run off. He knew all about that, felt it lots of times, in the Delaware weaver's house for instance. But always he associated the house fit with the woman in it. This nervousness had nothing to do with the woman, whom he loved a little bit more every day. Her hands among vegetables, her mouth when she licked a thread end before guiding it through a needle, or bit it in two when the seam was done, the blood in her eye when she defended her girls, and beloved was hers now, or any colored woman from a slur. Also in this house fit there was no anger, no suffocation, no yearning to be elsewhere. He just could not, would not sleep upstairs, or in the rocker, or now in Baby Suggs' bed. So he went to the storeroom. It went on that way and might have stayed that way, except one evening, after supper, after Setha, he lay on a pallet in the storeroom and didn't want to be there. Then it was the cold house, and it was out there, separated from the main part of 124, curled up on top of 2 croaker sacks full of sweet potatoes, staring at the sides of a lard can, that he realized the moving was involuntary. He wasn't being nervous, he was being prevented. Beloved's subliminal manipulation of Paul D. is an example of Paul D.'s lacking manhood and the ability to control his own actions. Paul D. not having the personal control to decide where he sleeps is an example of when Paul D. questions his manhood, a side effect of slavery. Morrison continually provides examples of Paul D. lacking his sense of manhood, such as his resistance to Beloved's control, to show how slavery has a long-term side effects that will alter the lives of former slaves in all of their endeavors. Paul D. acts as sort of Beloved's slave, representing how slavery stays within a slave's life for the duration of it.